Jupiter, always there, always watching. A swirling titan of gas and fury, it filled the sky, its great red spot like a malevolent eye fixated on our fragile existence. 5 months. 5 months on this frozen ball of ice we call Europa. Not 5 months of sunshine and warmth, not even 5 months of breathable air. Just 5 months of this pale, washed-out daylight, the recycled air growing thicker with each breath, and the whine of failing machinery a constant soundtrack to our isolation. They say the machinery is top of the line, that it is meant to last at least a decade. Lately, though, every groan from the ventilation system, every flicker of the lights, felt like a countdown. A countdown to what? We didn't know. Up above, Jupiter's gravity was a constant, heavy presence. Not that you'd feel it physically, not like on Earth. Here, a man could feel like a feather, could jump and feel like he was flying for a moment, before the moon's weak pull brought him gently back to the icy surface. But the mental weight, that was another story. Knowing that beneath our feet was an ocean larger than any on Earth, locked under miles of ice, made the isolation even more profound. I checked the readouts on my suit's display. Oxygen levels, nominal, temperature within operational parameters, radiation shielding, holding steady. Outside, the European surface stretched out before me, an endless expanse of jagged ice ridges, fractured plains, and deep, dark fissures that snaked across the landscape like the wrinkles on an old man's face. It was beautiful, in a stark, desolate sort of way. Beautiful and deadly. "Everything checks out, Grant," said Clark, his voice, usually a booming baritone, sounding thin and reedy through the comm system. "Ready to head back?" "In a minute," I replied, my eyes fixed on the faint aurora that danced across Jupiter's upper atmosphere. A silent, ethereal ballet performed in the vacuum of space, just taking it all in. It was not like Clark to wait. He was a man of action, of unwavering confidence and drive. He was a large man, both in stature and personality. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his by-the-book approach to every task, a necessary attitude in this unforgiving environment. "Don't get sentimental on me, Grant," said Taylor, our resident geologist, a man with a nervous energy that even the low gravity couldn't fully suppress. "We've got a schedule to keep." Taylor was always in motion, always fidgeting, always looking at the next problem to solve, his mind a whirlwind of geological data and theoretical models. His enthusiasm was infectious, though it could sometimes border on the obsessive. "Let the old man have his moment," chuckled Martin, the youngest of our crew, his voice still carrying a hint of boyish wonder despite the harsh realities of our mission. Martin was our tech specialist, a whiz with anything that involved circuits and code. He was quick-witted, adaptable, and possessed an uncanny ability to find solutions to seemingly impossible technical problems. A skill that had already proven invaluable on more than one occasion. He was our lifeline to the complex machinery that kept us alive. It's not every day you get a front-row seat to the universe's greatest light show. All right, I conceded, tearing my eyes away from the mesmerizing spectacle. Let's head back. Space exploration had become more than a scientific endeavor. It was a cultural imperative. We were the elite, the chosen few entrusted with pushing the boundaries of human understanding. Each of us had our roles, our specialties, honed through years of rigorous training. The walk back to EBC, Europa Base Camp, as if there were any other bases on this god-forsaken rock, was a silent affair, each of us lost in our own thoughts. EBC was a cluster of interconnected modules. It wasn't much, but it was home. Inside, the cramped environment felt a world away from the desolate beauty outside. The air was recycled, the lighting artificial, and every inch of space was utilized with ruthless efficiency. Our living quarters were little more than glorified closets, but they were a refuge from the harsh realities of Europa. The labs, on the other hand, were state-of-the-art, filled with the latest technology designed to unlock the secrets of this alien world. And then there was the geothermal power plant, the heart of our operation. Days on Europa followed a rigid schedule, dictated by the mission's objectives and the need to maintain the base's life support systems. We were here to tap into the moon's subsurface ocean, a vast, dark realm hidden beneath miles of ice, rumored to contain more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. A tantalizing prospect, especially when preliminary probes had detected complex organic molecules and thermal signatures within that hidden ocean. The suits felt increasingly cumbersome, each movement a struggle against the stiff fabric and the network of life support systems that kept us tethered to a fragile existence. But there were moments, fleeting and rare, when the weight of the mission, the isolation, and the ever-present danger seemed to lift. Moments when the crew found solace in shared meals, in card games, or in the simple act of watching old movies projected onto a screen in the common area. These were the moments that kept us sane, that reminded us of our shared humanity in the face of the vast, indifferent universe. The geothermal drill, a colossal spire of metal and composite materials, dominated the landscape near the base. It was designed to withstand immense pressure and temperature as it bored through the ice. Right now it stood idle, awaiting the final calibrations before we began the final push, the most critical phase of the operation. The past few weeks had been dominated by the final system checks. We'd run countless simulations and checked every system, trying to anticipate every possible contingency. But there was always an element of uncertainty, a sense of venturing into the unknown. I ran a diagnostic on the drill's primary hydraulic system. The numbers flowed on the screen, a language I understood better than any spoken tongue. Everything seemed to be in order. And yet, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Maybe it was just the pressure, the weight of responsibility. Or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A past mistake. A shadow that followed me, even here, millions of miles from Earth. Mars. The name echoed in my mind, a silent accusation. I pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. But the memory lingered, a phantom limb from a past life, a life I thought I had left behind. The mission had been a disaster, a series of cascading failures that had culminated in the loss of a crew member. My fault. At least that's how I saw it, even though the official inquiry had cleared me of any wrongdoing. I had replayed those final moments in my head 1,000 times, searching for an alternate outcome, a way I could have prevented the tragedy. But it had become an exercise in self-flagellation, as futile as trying to grasp the swirling gases of Jupiter. The Europa mission was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to prove myself, to silence the doubts that still ate at me. And yet, as we neared the culmination of our efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were tempting fate. We were venturing into a place where no human had ever gone before, a place where the rules of nature might be different, where the very laws of physics might be rewritten. The readings from the preliminary probes were unprecedented, hinting at an ecosystem fueled by chemical reactions unknown on Earth, with organic compounds arranged in startling configurations. There was even talk of life, not just microbial, but something more complex. It had taken me years to work up the courage to go back into space, years to overcome the fear, the guilt, the lingering trauma of what happened on Mars. But something had changed in the intervening years. My fear was no longer based on doubt in myself, but doubt in the endeavor of space exploration itself. "Grant, you all right?" Martin's voice broke through my reverie, his youthful face etched with concern. He was always doing that, picking up on things the others missed. "Just thinking," I said, forcing a smile. "This is it, Martin. We're about to make history." "Or become history," he quipped, but there was a nervous tremor in his voice. He was right. It felt like a precipice. It felt like we were on the edge of something, and the ground was unstable. The final checks were completed, signed off with the usual fanfare. With a groan, the drill began its inexorable descent. It was a slow process, each meter of progress a victory hard won. As we neared the target depth, however, the data began to deviate from the projected models. Not wildly, not at first. The pressure readings were fluctuating, not drastically, but like a climber's grip beginning to slip, and the temperature gradients were no longer linear, exhibiting a subtle but undeniable divergence. These weren't the expected readings. They were like whispers of an unknown variable, a hidden factor we hadn't accounted for. I brought my concerns to the team, presented the data, my voice tight with a premonition I couldn't articulate. They listened, they reviewed, but the consensus was a dismissal, albeit a considered one. "We're pushing the boundaries of what this equipment was designed for, Grant," Taylor said, his eyes fixed on the fluctuating graphs. "These deviations, they're within the margin of error, statistically speaking. Stress fractures in the ice, perhaps, or unforeseen pockets of denser material." Martin added, "The models can't account for every variable. We knew there would be unknowns. This is why we run diagnostics." Their explanations were logical, even probable, but they didn't quell the growing knot of dread in my stomach. It felt like we were missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle, and the ice beneath us held a secret it wasn't willing to give up easily. Then came the report about the drill's neutrino conversion matrix, a critical component, intermittent malfunctions, replaced with a backup, but still. The report was buried in a mountain of data, easy to miss. I should have flagged it, insisted on a delay, but the pressure to proceed was immense. The world was watching. Reputations, careers, the future of space exploration itself, all hung in the balance. And deep down, a part of me, the part that yearned for redemption, wanted to see this through, to prove that I wasn't a failure, that I could still contribute, that I could still make a difference. So I pushed my doubts aside, told myself it would be fine, that the backup system was sufficient, that the chances of a catastrophic failure were infinitesimal. We hit the target depth. The drill breached the final layer of ice. A collective cheer went up in the control room, but it was short-lived. The ground shook violently. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and the roar of the drill was replaced by a high-pitched shriek. The pressure readings spiked, then plummeted. The temperature gauges went haywire. "What the hell is happening?" Taylor asked. My blood ran cold. I knew what was happening. "We've breached the crust," I said, my voice hoarse with a sudden, terrifying certainty. "The ocean, it's open to space." The base rocked violently. I nearly fell, grabbing a console to regain my balance. Through the reinforced window, I saw a colossal geyser of water erupting from the fissure, a towering plume of ice and liquid, driven by the immense pressure of the subsurface ocean. And within that plume, dark shapes swirling, twisting. They were being ejected into the void, freezing instantly in the vacuum of space. Life. Alien life. We had found it. And in finding it, we were destroying it. The geyser was a monstrous, beautiful, terrifying thing, a roaring column of ice and water that shot up into the black, star-dusted sky. It clawed its way out of the Europan crust, a death sentence for whatever was caught in its path, a violent expulsion from a hidden world into the unforgiving vacuum. My mind struggled to process the scale of it, the sheer, unadulterated force unleashed. I stumbled back from the window, my hand instinctively reaching up to my temple, where a dull throb was quickly escalating into a sharp, piercing pain. My head felt like it was splitting open. The base shook again, throwing me against a bulkhead. A jarring impact, followed by a dizzying wave of nausea. I could barely make out the shouting above the relentless wail of alarms, a storm of panic and confusion. My fault. This was my fault. "Grant, report." Clark's voice, usually a steady, commanding presence, was strained, almost frantic. It took me a moment to realize he was shouting through the comm system, not in person. I fumbled for the activation switch on my suit. The fissure," I stammered. It's venting, the ocean." "We know. We see it." Taylor's voice high-pitched and frantic. "What happened? Was it the drill?" "The backup matrix. It must have failed," I said, the words heavy with self-recrimination. I remembered the report, the one I should have acted on, the one I ignored to prove something to myself, and now it may cost us everything. "Get to the engineering bay," Clark ordered. "We need to assess the damage." The engineering bay was a scene of controlled chaos. Sparks showered from a damaged console, illuminating the strained faces of Martin and Taylor as they worked to reroute power. "The primary power coupling is fried," Martin reported. "We're on emergency reserves." "How long?" "Hard to say," he replied, scanning the readouts. "Maybe 5 days, maybe as much as a week if we stretch it to the absolute limit, but that's pushing it. We'll need to implement extreme rationing protocols immediately. A week, a razor-thin margin. We were balanced on a knife's edge, with survival a distant possibility. Every system, every breath, every heartbeat would have to be carefully managed. Through the reinforced viewport in the engineering bay, I could see the geyser, a towering, malevolent presence against the backdrop of Jupiter. It was mesmerizing in a horrific way. Within the plume, I could make out more of those dark shapes, those alien organisms being hurled into the void. They were larger than I had initially realized, some as long as a man's arm, with segmented bodies and strange, paddle-like appendages. They were a dark, mottled brown, with hints of iridescence that shimmered as they caught the faint sunlight. There were smaller organisms too, microbial mats that formed intricate lattice-like structures, now disintegrating as they were exposed to the vacuum. It was a graveyard bloom, a spectacular, terrifying display of an ecosystem's death throes. The scientific part of my brain, the part that had dedicated years to the study of astrobiology, was awestruck. This was a discovery that would rewrite textbooks, that would change our understanding of life itself, but the rest of me, the human part, was filled with a profound and overwhelming sense of horror. We had come here seeking knowledge, seeking to expand the boundaries of human understanding, and instead, we had brought destruction. We were supposed to be explorers, scientists, pioneers. Instead, we were unwitting executioners. The base shook again, more violently this time. A section of the ceiling in the living quarters collapsed, exposing the network of pipes and conduits that ran beneath the surface. The already cramped space suddenly felt even smaller, more claustrophobic. We were trapped, caught in a metal coffin of our own making. Clark was trying to establish communication with Earth, but the comms were down, likely damaged by the initial event or disrupted by the electromagnetic interference from the geyser. We were alone, cut off from any hope of rescue. "We need to redirect the flow," I said, already piecing together a plan from our limited resources. "We can't seal the fissure, not completely, but we might be able to divert it, diffuse the force." Taylor scoffed, his voice laced with fear and disbelief. "Divert it? How? With what? We're engineers, Grant, not magicians. That geyser is a force of nature." "We have the survey charges," I pressed on, thinking of the low-yield explosives we used for geological mapping. "We can use them to create a choke point, a partial cave-in upstream, slow it down, and we can build barriers," I added, my eyes sweeping across the damaged bay. "Salvage structural supports, panels, anything we can find, reinforce them with the polymer. It won't stop it, but it might deflect the flow, buy us some time." "That's insane," Taylor said, but this time there was a hint of something else in his eyes, a hint of reluctant consideration. "Triggering a collapse could make things worse, widen the fissure, and those barriers. They'd have to be anchored somehow, and the polymer might not even hold under those conditions." "It's a risk," I acknowledged, "but it's a calculated risk. We have to do something. To do nothing is to accept our fate, to simply wait for the inevitable." We couldn't just give up. We owed it to ourselves, and perhaps to the life we had inadvertently endangered, to at least attempt a solution, however improbable. We had to try to mitigate the damage, to lessen the impact, even if we couldn't completely undo what we had done. Martin was already studying the geological survey data. "There's a constriction point," he said, pointing to a 3D model of the fissure displayed on the screen. "About 1 kilometer upstream, a natural bottleneck. If we can trigger a collapse there, we might be able to slow it down, I finished. The seed of a plan taking root. Reduce the pressure at the main vent. Taylor remained skeptical. We could make things worse. We're already in the worst-case scenario, Taylor. I countered. Doing nothing is not an option. Not anymore. I paused, studying his face. Look, I know it's risky, but we have the charges, we have the polymer. We have a chance, however slim, to mitigate this disaster. To save ourselves and maybe lessen the impact on what we've done. Clark, who had been silent until now, spoke. Grant's right. We have to try. Martin, can you pinpoint the optimal locations for the charges? Taylor, you and I will start gathering materials for the barriers. Grant, you're in charge of the detonation sequence. We need to be precise. Surgical. And so we set to work. Martin, working with the limited data from our initial surveys, identified 3 key points along the constriction zone where strategically placed charges could induce a cave-in. The plan was to use the low-yield seismic charges, normally used for geological mapping, to create a controlled collapse. The idea wasn't to completely seal the fissure, but to create a bottleneck, a narrowing that would restrict the flow of water and reduce the pressure at the main geyser vent. It was a delicate balance, a high-stakes game of precision and timing. One wrong move, and we could widen the fissure, exacerbating the very problem we were trying to solve. Taylor and Clark began salvaging materials from the damaged base. They ripped out structural supports, tore off wall panels, and gathered anything that could be used to construct the deflection barriers. The base, once our haven, was now being cannibalized, its parts repurposed for a desperate last-ditch effort. I focused on the detonation sequence, going through calculations, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. The charges had to be placed with pinpoint accuracy, timed to detonate in a specific order to maximize the effect, and create the desired collapse without causing further damage to the already unstable ice. It was like performing surgery on a fault line. One wrong incision could be fatal. As we worked, I noticed subtle changes in the geyser's plume through the viewport. The once uniform column of ice and water now seemed to fluctuate, its intensity varying in a way that wasn't random. It was almost as if the geyser was breathing. This observation sparked a new, unsettling thought. What if the fissure wasn't just a simple rupture? What if it was something more, something dynamic? It was a chilling thought, one that added another layer of complexity to an already precarious situation. The low-gravity environment made the transport of materials less physically taxing than it would have been on Earth, but the journey was still dangerous. We moved like ghosts across the frozen landscape, our headlamps cutting through the perpetual twilight, the geyser a looming spectral presence in the distance. The surface of Europa was treacherous, riddled with cracks and crevasses hidden beneath a thin layer of ice. Each step was a calculated risk, each movement a potential misstep that could send us tumbling into the abyss. We carried the salvaged structural supports and polymer cartridges in a sled fashioned from a damaged rover panel, the low-yield charges nestled securely within a padded container. "Almost there," Martin said. He was monitoring our progress on a handheld device, its screen displaying a schematic of the fissure and the designated detonation points. 500 meters to the first drop point. Reaching the first location, a narrow chasm that branched off from the main fissure, felt like a small victory. We carefully positioned the first set of charges, following the precise instructions that Martin had relayed from the base. The process was agonizingly slow. We were working in a highly unstable environment, where one wrong move could trigger a catastrophic collapse. "Charges in place," I reported. "Moving to the second location." The second location was further upstream, closer to the main geyser vent. As we approached, the ground tremors intensified. It was a physical manifestation of the raw, untamed power we were trying to contain. "Second set in place," Taylor reported, ready for the third. The third and final location was the most precarious. situated at the very edge of the constriction point, where the fissure narrowed before widening again into the main vent. The ground here was visibly unstable, crisscrossed with a network of hairline fractures. We had to work quickly, knowing that time was not on our side. As we placed the final charges, a sudden, violent tremor shook the ground beneath us. A large chunk of ice broke off from the edge of the fissure, tumbling into the abyss below. We scrambled back, narrowly avoiding being dragged down with it. "That was too close," Clark said. "We need to get out of here," Taylor added, his eyes wide with alarm. "This whole area is unstable." "Agreed," I said, a tremor in my voice betraying my anxiety. "Martin, we're done here. Initiate the detonation sequence." We retreated to a safe distance, our eyes fixed on the designated locations. The wait was agonizing, each second stretching into an eternity. The geyser roared, the ground trembled, and the fate of our mission, our lives, hung in the balance. A series of muffled explosions echoed across the icy plains, followed by a low rumble that seemed to come from the very core of Europa. The ground shook violently, and a cloud of ice and dust erupted from the fissure, momentarily obscuring the geyser from view. "Did it work?" Taylor asked. As the dust settled, we stared in stunned silence at the scene before us. The geyser was still there, but its intensity was visibly reduced. The once towering plume was now a smaller, more contained jet of ice and water. The flow had been significantly restricted, diverted by the strategically placed cave-in. "It worked," Martin said, his voice filled with relief and disbelief. "We actually did it." While the immediate threat of the geyser was lessened, the structural damage to the base was extensive. The tremors had widened existing cracks and caused new ones to appear. The integrity of the habitat was compromised, and it was only a matter of time before it succumbed to the harsh European environment. Back at the base, the situation was dire. The primary life support system was failing, and the emergency reserves were dwindling rapidly. We had managed to reroute some power to the communication system, sending out a distress signal. A faint cry for help into the vast emptiness of space. But we knew that even if the signal was received, a rescue mission would take weeks, perhaps even longer, to reach us. "We need to ration the remaining oxygen," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of our predicament. "We'll need to reduce our activity levels to a minimum, conserve energy." In the following days, we huddled together in the least damaged section of the base, sharing stories, memories, trying to keep our spirits up in the face of overwhelming odds. We took turns monitoring the comm system, listening for any sign of a response to our distress signal, but only static filled the airwaves. The air became thinner, colder. The temperature inside the base plummeted, and we were forced to huddle together for warmth, our bodies shivering uncontrollably. We were slowly suffocating, our bodies starved for oxygen, our minds clouded by fatigue and despair. Then, on the 8th day after we sent the signal, a faint beep broke through the static. A response. A rescue mission was on its way. They estimated their arrival in 1 week. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, came back to life within us. 1 week. We just had to hold on for 1 more week. We established a strict rationing schedule, limiting oxygen consumption to the bare minimum. We knew that some of us wouldn't have enough. 2 days before the rescue team was due to arrive, Clark developed severe hypoxia. His breathing became labored, his movements sluggish, his speech slurred. We tried to share our meager oxygen rations with him, but it wasn't enough. He knew it too. "It's all right," he said, his voice a faint whisper. "Save it for yourselves. It's my time." He slipped into unconsciousness a few hours later, his breathing growing shallower and shallower until it finally stopped. We mourned him in silence, our hearts heavy with grief and guilt. We had lost one of our own, a brave man who had sacrificed himself for the mission, for us. The next day it was Taylor's turn. He had been rationing his supply even before Clark, more than any of us. He had grown increasingly weak, his body ravaged by the lack of oxygen. He accepted his fate with a quiet dignity that surprised even me. He was always so full of nervous energy, but in his final moments, he was calm, serene even. "Tell my brother I love him," he whispered, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the confines of the base. "Tell him I'm sorry." He closed his eyes and never opened them again. Now it was just Martin and me. We shared the remaining oxygen, each breath a precious, fleeting gift. We were both weak, exhausted, our bodies and minds pushed to the very edge of endurance. We didn't talk much, conserving our energy, our breath, but we were together, bound by experience, loss, and a sliver of hope. The rescue team arrived just as our oxygen supply was about to run out. They burst through the damaged airlock, finding us huddled together, barely conscious, clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. They administered oxygen, stabilized our vital signs, and transported us to the rescue ship. As we left Europa behind, I looked back at the frozen moon, now a distant, pale sphere in the black void. The geyser was still visible, a faint white plume against the dark surface, marking the place where we had unleashed a destructive power and endured a desperate struggle. It would take decades, perhaps even centuries, for the European ecosystem to recover. But there was hope, a fragile flame in the darkness. The discovery of dormant life forms within the ejected ice field suggested that the alien ecosystem might not be entirely lost. Life, as it always does, might find a way to adapt, to evolve, to reclaim its place in this harsh, unforgiving world. Years later, I found myself standing in a crowded hall, surrounded by the familiar murmur of human activity. It was the opening of a new exhibit at the Museum of Natural History, dedicated to the Europa mission. The exhibit featured holographic recreations of the alien life forms, based on the data we had collected. There were displays showcasing the geological structure of Europa, the challenges of the mission, and the triumph of our scientific endeavor. But as I stood before a large, interactive display depicting the geyser, I saw not triumph, but tragedy. I saw the faces of my lost crewmates, the dying alien organisms, the scar we had inflicted upon a pristine, untouched world. The exhibit portrayed the event as a victory, a celebration of human ingenuity and resilience. But I knew the truth. It was a tragedy, a burden we would carry with us forever. I reached out and touched the smooth surface of the display, my fingers tracing the outline of the geyser. A single tear rolled down my cheek, a silent tribute to the lives lost, the world forever changed. I made my way out of the museum, leaving the noise and the crowds behind. I had made a new home for myself, far from the cities, far from my past. It was a small, isolated cabin in a remote mountainous region, surrounded by nature's quiet beauty. I had found solace in the solitude, in the simple routines of daily life. I spent my days tending to a small garden, observing the local wildlife, and looking up at the night sky. The stars, once a source of wonder and ambition, now offered a different kind of comfort, a sense of perspective, a humbling view of the vastness of the universe, and the relative insignificance of human endeavors in the face of cosmic forces. I often thought about Europa, about the geyser, about the alien life we had encountered and nearly destroyed. It was a scar on my soul, a wound that would never fully heal. But it was also a reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of responsibility, and the enduring power of hope, even in the face of unimaginable loss. And sometimes on clear nights, I would look up at the stars, imagining the distant, icy moon where we had faced such loss, and found a strength I never knew I possessed. I would whisper the names of my lost crewmates, a silent promise to never forget, a solemn vow to honor their sacrifice by striving to be a better man, a more responsible steward of the universe we were so privileged to explore. The weight of Europa would always be with me, shaping my understanding of the delicate balance between ambition and humility, between knowledge and wisdom, between life and death. It was a weight I would carry until my own journey came to an end, a journey that had taken me to the edge of the abyss and back, a journey that had changed me forever.